Memphis, Tennessee, 1955. Two young men walked into the same recording studio, same label, same producer, same city, same hunger. One of them would become the king of rock and roll. The other would become the man in black. For a brief, electric moment in American music history, they existed in the same world. They toured the same highways. They slept in the same cheap motels. They competed for the same audiences. And according to people who were there, they were never quite comfortable with each other. This is the story of Johnny Cash and Elvis Presley. The rivalry nobody talks about. The jealousy Cash admitted. The woman between them. The night at Sun Records that changed American music forever. And the Afsaniler. The myths, the rumors, the stories that have swirled around Johnny Cash for 70 years. By the end of this video, we're going to take apart every single one of those myths. And then I'm going to tell you something about Johnny Cash that is more extraordinary than any of them. Sam Phillips ran Sun Records out of a tiny studio at 706 Union Avenue in Memphis, Tennessee. The room was barely big enough for a band. The ceiling was low. The walls were covered in acoustic tile that had started peeling at the corners. There was a single microphone on a stand in the center of the floor, a glass booth where Phillips sat with his equipment, and a door that opened onto a street where nobody passing by had any idea what was happening inside. What was happening inside was the invention of rock and roll. Elvis Presley walked through that door in 1954. He was 19 years old. He had paid $4 to record a song for his mother's birthday. Sam Phillips heard something in his voice that he had been looking for his whole career. A white boy who sang with the soul of a black man in an era when that combination could sell to both audiences. Johnny Cash walked through the same door in 1955. He was 22. He had a wife, a baby daughter, and almost no money. He had been knocking on Phillips's door for months. Phillips had been putting him off. Then one morning, Cash sat on the step outside the studio and waited. Phillips arrived and found him there. "All right," Phillips said. "Come in and let's hear what you've got." Cash played 3 gospel songs. Phillips shook his head. "I don't sell gospel," he said. Cash went home. He came back the next day. He played Cry, 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 a straight country song with a rhythm that hit like a fist. Phillips leaned forward in his booth. He signed Cash that afternoon. For the next year, Elvis Presley and Johnny Cash existed in the same orbit. They toured the South together. The Louisiana hayride circuit, small auditoriums and outdoor stages across Arkansas and Texas and Mississippi. They drove through the night in separate cars, played for the same crowds, and sized each other up the way two competitive young men always do. Cash was taller, more serious. His voice went lower. Elvis was smaller, faster, electric in a way that Cash was not. When Elvis walked onto a stage, something happened to the air in the room. Cash noticed this. Everyone noticed this. Her name was June Carter. She was 25 years old in 1955, already famous as a member of the Carter family, funny and beautiful, and one of the best performers on the Louisiana hayride circuit. She was also touring with Elvis. June and Elvis became close friends on the road. How close is a question that has never been fully answered. June always maintained that nothing happened between them. But her own son, John Carter Cash, wrote in his biography of his mother that she once told him she sometimes wondered what would have happened if she had fallen in love with Elvis instead. Cash heard these stories, and he was jealous, not subtle, occasional jealousy, the kind you can brush off. Real jealousy, the kind that stays. He first met June backstage at the Grand Ole Opry in June of 1956. He walked up to her and said, without introduction, without context, "I'm Johnny Cash, and I'm going to marry you someday." June later said that Elvis had been playing Cash's records on the jukebox constantly, that whenever Elvis tuned his guitar, he hummed "Cry, Cry, Cry," that she already knew who Johnny Cash was before he said a word. And Cash knew about Elvis and June. He knew the history, and he asked her to marry him anyway, on the spot, the first time he ever spoke to her. That is either enormous confidence or enormous need, possibly both. December 4th, 1956. Sun Studio, Memphis. Carl Perkins was in the studio recording when Elvis Presley walked in unannounced. He had just come from a shopping trip. He sat down at the piano and started playing. Jerry Lee Lewis, 21 years old, not yet famous, there as a session musician, joined in. Then Johnny Cash arrived. Sam Phillips recognized immediately what was happening in his studio. He sent someone to call the Memphis Press Scimitar. A photographer came. The picture they took that afternoon, 4 young men crowded around a piano in a room the size of a living room, would become one of the most reproduced photographs in music history. The Million Dollar Quartet. Cash later said he was the first to arrive and the last to leave. Other accounts dispute this. What isn't disputed is what happened in that room for the next 3 hours. They sang gospel, they sang country, they sang Elvis's own hits back to him. They laughed, they competed, subtly, the way musicians do, each one listening to the others and quietly deciding where they stood. Sam Phillips stood in his glass booth and watched 4 young men who had no idea they were making history. He didn't stop the tape, he let it run. Elvis would leave Sun Records for RCA the following month. The money was too good, the opportunity too big. Phillips had sold his contract for $35,000. Cash stayed. He didn't have the option to leave. Nobody was offering him $35,000 for anything. He watched Elvis leave. He watched what happened next. The television appearances, the movies, the hysteria, the scale of it. And he kept recording at Sun in the same room, with the same peeling acoustic tile, trying to build something that could match what Elvis had walked away to. Now, let's talk about what people say about Johnny Cash. Because for 70 years, stories have attached themselves to his name the way barnacles attach to the hull of a ship. Some of them are almost true. Some of them are completely false. And all of them say something about why people needed to believe them. The first myth, Johnny Cash shot a man in Reno just to watch him die. He wrote that line in 1955, sitting in the Air Force barracks in West Germany, trying to write the most unsympathetic narrator he could imagine. He said later, "I sat with my pen in my hand, trying to think up the worst reason a person could have for killing another person, and that's what came to mind." He never killed anyone. He never went to Reno for anything more sinister than a show. But he never went out of his way to correct the record, because the myth served him. An outlaw image was worth more than a correction. The second myth, Johnny Cash was a convict. He served hard time. He understood prison from the inside. He spent 1 night in jail. 1. In El Paso in 1965, after customs officials found amphetamines in his guitar case when he crossed the Mexican border. He was released the next morning on bail. He paid a fine. That was it. The Folsom prison concerts, the records that made his reputation as the prisoner's champion, were performed by a man who had never spent a night behind bars for anything more serious than a customs violation. And here's something even stranger. The crowd noise on the Folsom prison album The roaring, howling response when Cash sings, "I shot a man in Reno just to watch him die," was partially added in post-production. The producers felt the real audience reaction wasn't dramatic enough. They enhanced it in the edit. The third myth: June Carter saved Johnny Cash from addiction. She loved him clean. Walk the line told you so. His own daughter Roseanne said flatly, "My dad struggled with addiction for the rest of his life." The truth is a lot more complicated than the movie. John Carter Cash said his father relapsed multiple times after 1968. June stayed. She helped, but she didn't cure him. No one could. The fourth myth: Johnny Cash and Elvis Presley had a falling out. Elvis humiliated Cash. There was a confrontation, a breaking point. The truth is quieter and stranger than that. They drifted. Elvis went one direction: Hollywood, Vegas, the machinery of Colonel Tom Parker. Cash went another: prisons, protests, the American recordings with Rick Rubin. By Elvis's final years, they had stopped talking, not because of a fight, because they had become entirely different things. Cash watched Elvis deteriorate from a distance. He saw the photographs from the Vegas years, the bloated figure in the white jumpsuit. He said almost nothing publicly about what he saw. He didn't need to. You could hear it in the silence. The fifth myth: Johnny Cash is still alive. He faked his death. People have spotted him. He died on September 12th, 2003 at Baptist Hospital in Nashville. He was 71 years old. He had been deteriorating for months after June's death in May. His son said he simply had no reason left to fight. He is not alive. He is not in hiding. He is not attending music festivals under an assumed name. But here's what's interesting about that myth. It exists because people cannot accept that someone who made that much music, who said that many true things, who meant that much to that many people, is simply gone. That's not a conspiracy theory, that's grief. Here is what I want to say about all of these myths. They exist because Johnny Cash was the kind of man that myths attach themselves to. Not every musician gets myths. Most musicians get discographies and Wikipedia pages. Cash got legends, and you know why? Because the true story was already extraordinary enough to make you think anything was possible. A boy from a cotton field in Arkansas who watched his brother die at 14 and spent the rest of his life trying to deserve that survival, who stood on a stage at Folsom Prison in 1968 when his career was failing and recorded one of the greatest live albums in history, who wore black every day for 30 years, for the poor and the prisoners and the soldiers and the people nobody else was singing for, who wrote Ring of Fire. No, wait, he didn't. The woman who loved him wrote it at 4 a.m, terrified, who proposed 30 times and was told no 30 times, and asked again in front of 7,000 people, who filmed a music video at 71 in the ruins of his own museum, singing a song about regret while his dying wife watched from the stairs, who sat in the same studio as Elvis Presley at 22 years old, in a room with peeling acoustic tile, and built something that lasted just as long. That is the real myth. That is the real legend. Not the things people invented about him, but the things he actually did. You don't need to invent anything about Johnny Cash. The truth is already the most extraordinary story in American music. If you've watched this series from the beginning, thank you. Every single video in the Johnny Cash files is still up. Start from the beginning. There's not a weak one in the list. And subscribe because we have more series coming, stories this good. Every one of them true. Johnny Cash, the Man in Black, born November 5th, 1932. Dyess, Arkansas, cotton field, no electricity, no running water, died September 12, 2003, Nashville, Tennessee, 71 years old, 4 months after the woman he loved. In between everything,